Hi again. So in my previous video I talked about how I am working on building a guitar which I'm going to give out to a lucky raffle winner based on who gives to my fundraising page for She-Rock. And I showed you this neck which I plan on using for that guitar, and I thought today I would talk about some of the things that I do to make a guitar neck play as well as it possibly can. Whether you buy a neck from a kit or salvage one from another guitar, or you're just working on one that's on a guitar that you already have and you want to make it better, here's some of the things I do. One of the first things I'll address is what guitar techs refer to as fret sprout, and that's when you run your hand along the edge of the guitar neck. If it feels kind of sharp and pokey, that's because sometimes the ends of the frets are extending beyond the edge of the wood of the fretboard. It's more common to see that in like a Fender Squier or an Epiphone for the Les Paul or SG, or really any Asian-made guitar. And it's not because they don't know how to make guitar necks in Asia. The reason for that is because fret sprout is almost entirely caused by the fact that wood expands and contracts with heat and humidity, and metal does not. And so what'll happen is when a neck is made in Asia and gets put into a shipping container and travels through multiple climates, the wood will shrink away from the ends of the frets a little bit, causing there to be a little bit sticking out. The solution for it is actually pretty simple. I've got a tool here that I custom ordered many years ago. It's just a file mounted into a block of wood, and so it's at 90 degrees on one side and at a wider obtuse angle on the other side. And I just use the wood to guide it along the fretboard, just like that. And see that how that kind of like will file it at about 45 degrees, whereas on the other side, I'm going to set it on there, files it at about 90 degrees. So this will shave it off the ends and then flip it around, and this will give it a little slant. So it'll be shaped correctly. And this neck doesn't need very much because, like I said, I'm 90% sure these Mighty Mite necks are made in the USA. And so American or Mexican-made necks usually don't need as much as this type of work, but sometimes they can benefit from a little bit of it. So I'm just going to give it a quick little... And after you've done a few of these, you can just sort of use your ear to get a sense of whether you've got it down to where you want it to be. And that's feeling pretty good. So that's the first step. The next step is the actual, you want the frets to be of a very uniform height. The reason for that is, excuse me, when you're playing a guitar, as I'm sure most of you know, if you press down a string just above a given fret, you're effectively making the string shorter because now it's just going from here to the bridge, whereas, you know, higher up it's going from up here to the bridge, and that raises the pitch of the string. However, when you press down that string behind one fret, if the string does not clear the next fret up cleanly, with room to vibrate, it'll buzz against that string, which can make kind of a weird, unpleasant sitaring sound. It'll also reduce your sustain, and in extreme cases, you'll fret this note, and it'll actually end up playing this note because the string will be pressed against that fret as well. The way in guitar design this is avoided is two things. First of all, the bridge is usually a little bit higher than the frets, so the strings are always kind of coming down at an angle to the fret that makes sure that there's a little bit of clearance above it. However, the further up the neck you get, the shallower that angle becomes, because it's, just simple math, you all know your trigonometry from junior high. So up here, that angle from the bridge being higher is a lot shallower. And so how are we going to avoid it being buzzing against there? Well, the way it's done is the neck curves inwards ever so slightly. And it's even so slight that it's hard to pick up by the human eye, but it should be done. And the way that curvature is usually adjusted is with what's called a truss rod. There's a little nut hidden right there inside the headstock, which you can adjust with a hex key. And if you turn it, turn it in one direction, it reduces the amount of bowing, and if you crank it the other way, it increases it. So that bow is important when it is strung up, and the tension of the strings will increase the amount of bowing, but depending on what gauge of strings you're using, it might be more or less. It might be more or less depending on how you like to tune your guitar. If you're one of those blues players that tunes down a half step, you're going to have less string tension. Open tunings, it'll be something else goofy depending on which one you use. And so that's where that truss rod nut becomes necessary to adjust the amount of bow that's in there. On an acoustic guitar, the distance between the string and the frets that it's not supposed to be touching is referred to as action. The action is the available motion of the string. On an acoustic guitar, the action is usually quite high because the volume of the guitar really depends on you strumming it hard with relatively heavy strings. And if you have a very low action, it's going to buzz out. It's not going to sound very good. On an electric guitar, we tend to let the amp do the work. And so we want as low of an action as possible. And to have as low of an action as possible, we really got to be picky about all of the frets being uniform, because if one of them is sticking out a little bit more than another one, it undoes all of that fine-tuning and adjustment. And so the next step when I'm working on a neck is what's called leveling the frets. And the way I do that starts with a Sharpie. I'll take a Sharpie marker and I will draw a line right along the top of each fret. It probably doesn't look very black on the camera. Yeah, it kind of does. You can sort of see it. And I will do that to each and every fret on the guitar all the way down. You get the idea for demonstration purposes. The next thing I'm going to do is I will be filing all of these frets down using what's called a straight bar. I bought this one used from a Guitar Tech, so I got it nice and cheap. A 2x4 won't do the job for this. You need something that is, machine precision straight. This straight bar works great. If you don't want to spend whatever ridiculous amount of money Stuart McDonald and other guitar suppliers charge for these things, you can go to anywhere that sells countertop masonry and just buy a scrap end piece of countertop masonry that's long enough for the entire length of the guitar. And then what I do is I glue a strip of sandpaper. It's sold in long strips like this specifically for putting onto belt sanders. So if you go to the belt sander section and just buy some sandpaper and then you glue it onto your straight bar. This is looking kind of nasty because I've used it on a few other guitar necks already. And then the idea is going to be that I'm going to lay it down and sand all of the frets at once. But there's one little problem, and that's that, guitar necks are bowed. If I want all of the frets to be the same height, I need this guitar neck to be perfectly flat. And how do I measure if that fretboard is perfectly flat if I'm working on flattening all of these fret tops to be each other? I mean, if I try to measure it against the straight bar, all I'm doing is measuring the tops of the frets, which is what I'm working on leveling. So what I need to know is if these gaps between the frets are all perfectly level with each other. And for that, I've got another tool. This is a metal straight edge made specifically for doing what I am about to be doing right now with my guitar. It's notched to fit the frets. Now there's two sets of notches because there's two different relatively standard lengths. Fender guitars are 25.25" scale, if I remember, 25.5" scale. And so they need the frets a little wider apart than Gibson guitars like the Les Paul and SG are going to have them closer together. And so there's two different sets of notches. So all I have to do is line this up with my Fender scale notches, and now if I just kind of hold it up to the light, I can see if I can rock it back and forth, it's bowed back too far, and if I can see a gap in the middle, it's bowed inwards too far. And so I will adjust that truss rod until it is perfectly straight all the way across. Let's have a look at it now. And you always want to do truss rod adjustments in very, very tiny increments, because even just a quarter of a turn on a truss rod makes a huge difference. So I'm just gonna look at it again. And that is extremely straight. That is exactly what I wanted. I'm not seeing daylight between. It's not rocking back and forth in the middle. So now that I know it's perfectly flat, I take my straight bar with the sandpaper and I just lay it across all of it. And let's see what I can do here is, usually I'll just lay this on my lap and I'll work on sanding. I'll do a little bit of a circular motion. And of course, since it's arced, I'll rock it to one side and the other. And once you do that a little bit, you'll realize the reason I put those black marks on the top of the frets is after sanding a little, I can inspect it. And I can see that on these two frets, I still see a little bit of black. Even though this one's kind of clean, that means this one was a little higher than these two. And I keep this up just until all the black is gone. And on some particularly egregious necks, more work needs to be done. But if it's relatively well built, see, even just from that tiny bit I did there, I'm not really examining the other ones yet, but just from the tiny bit I did there, you can see there's a little bit of black right there. This one's clean, this one's clean. So I keep that up, you know, when I have all the frets marked, I keep that up until every single one of them is clean of the black marker that I put on the top. Then for a final step, because now that I've flattened all these tops, I will take some smaller pieces of sandpaper and some jewelry files, and I will just go at the edges and kind of round those so there won't be any sharp edges anywhere on the frets. And that's all there is to it. Now the nice thing about the fact that I just flattened the neck like this is when I put a set of medium light strings, you know, they're usually referred to as 10s, on this neck, the tension of the strings is probably going to pull it into almost exactly the amount of bow that I want on the neck. And that should provide a really nice low action and smooth playing. And so there you go. That's how I level and dress and crown frets. That's all there is to it. Once again, please donate to She-Rock through my fundraising page. For every $20 you donate, your name will again be entered into the raffle to win the guitar that I'm building. And good luck to all of you. Thanks.